All right, so, first of all, these are some questions for this other show. But were you aware of the design and mechanical issues of the early B-26, and what were they?
Now, I didn't hear anything about the B-26 until I got to Barksdale Field after I graduated from single engine school, and my first ride indoctrination to the B-26 was that was when the pilot just chopped the throttle right over the end of the runway and we dropped straight down. And it was after that that I began to hear that the plane was called the Widowmaker and the Flying Prostitute and so forth. And it didn't really scare me, but it sure put me in awe of the plane. I mean, I had some anticipation every time we'd get in the plane to take off. I was always aware of the fact that a number of them had crashed on takeoff and on landings.
Okay, hold on one more second. Um, were you involved in dealing with any of those issues?
Not really. Uh, as I said, I graduated from single engine school and went to Barksdale, and I was a co-pilot. Just I followed what was going on, and I learned more and more as time went on. I mean, as I was involved, either as co-pilot or pilot.
Um, it says, are you familiar with something called runaway prop?
Yep.
Talk to me
It
about
never occurred to me, but I know about it.
And I need to tell me, I need to hear it from you, runaway prop, but tell me what you know about
Well,
it.
it had to do with pitch on the propellers, and it would. And to be honest with you, I don't think I ever had to adjust one. I know it happened, okay, but I don't believe it ever happened to me or to the pilot, or if I was with another pilot that it happened to him. So you know of them, but you don't necessarily encounter it. So I don't. I can't really answer that clearly. Ralph may be able to. I don't know.
Did you ever have to bail out of a B-26?
No, thank goodness. On one, we had Ray Town, a guy from our squadron. They got shot up pretty bad coming in, and he was flying with the group commander, and everybody laughed about that later on. He was getting ready to jump out. He turned around. He says, "Does anybody want to buy a good watch?" that was the topic of the day for a while there in the squadron.
And then one more.
I just never encountered it.
Okay.
Thankfully.
Yeah. It says, were you ever trained in the proper procedures for bailing out of a B-26, and what were they?
No, I believe again, I didn't have to do that, thank God. But I believe for the pilot and co-pilot, navigator, we went out the slot where we got into the plane from. There was a door there, and you just drop straight down. That's jump out and drop straight down. Now the ones in the back went out the waist windows, where the gunner was firing, or they opened the bomb bay doors and they jumped out of that. So.
It says this is this thing about this Fort Myers B-26. It says the pilot and co-pilot were able to bail out of the plane. How do you think they did it? In your opinion, which way did they go? Overhead, below, or out the bomb bay doors?
I have no idea.
Well, you just sort of answered
Yes,
that.
well, I know. I don't know how they went. They could have chosen to open the bomb bay doors and everybody jump out there, and I know that did happen. So, but.
These are questions. Do you know anything about the story about this B-26, Fort Myers B-26 that went down? Do you know the story?
No. Oh, this is the one that they're digging out of the drink.
Out of the water.
Yeah. No, I knew that it was occurring. I saw something. I think they're having some problems, legal problems with Canada over it. But I haven't read any more on it. It's been kind of quiet.
Uh-huh.
But
it says here, it says something about, based on what you've heard today, which you haven't heard it, that they experienced some kind of engine failure, and with the knowledge that they were somewhere below 4,000 feet on a VFR flight, what were you trained to do, and what would you have done to survive?
Yeah.
Engine failure below 4,000.
VFR was visual flying rather than on instruments. I don't remember. I really don't recall being particularly trained on that. I mean, some of it you just you learned it as you went along without actual training, and if it occurred, just like the forced landing that I made in basic flying school. I mean, you do it. That's
You figure it out or you don't.
that's right.
And then
Right.
if you don't, you're not here to tell us about it.
That's right, and I'm here.
Tell us about the forced landing and training school.
The what?
The forced landing and training school.
Well, I was just I was making a three-legged cross country out of the basic. I'm trying to remember the name of the field. Strother Field in Winfield, Kansas. And I'd gone down over just over the Arkansas state line, and turned around and went on the second leg, and just turning off of the second leg onto the third, getting ready to head back to base. And I noticed that the fuel in that tank that I'd been using was down pretty low, so I switched over to the other tank, and within seconds it started sputtering and it quit. Of course, then I worked on there's a thing called a wobble pump, and it was actually a pump to try to get gas going again into the engine, and I couldn't get it to start again. So all I could do was look around, and I spotted a pasture, a farmer's pasture, and I figured I could make that, and I did. I just came into not more than 10 feet over the fence, and landed in the pasture. But there were a bunch of rocks in there, and along the way, just before it stopped, a tire apparently struck a sharp rock, and the tire blew out. But there was no damage to the plane. So I got out, and the farmer came out and wanted to know how I was, and I told him okay, and so he called the base, and they sent a car out, and they picked me up and took me back. I thought I was in trouble, but the commandant called me in and congratulated me on presence of mind and being able to make the forced landing when there was no power.
What kind of plane was that?
It was a Vultee BT-13, the one we call the vibrator. Turns out that what had happened was that when I was switching, it was in the summer, and when I was switching over, a vapor lock formed in the fuel line, and there was no way I could get gas to the engine with that.
If that had happened in a B-26, I don't think you'd have glided into the...
I would not have glided in. I would have sunk like a rock. For a long time, B-26 pilots didn't think that they could fly on one engine. And then I think it was Jimmy Doolittle came down to St. Petersburg. I mean, yes, St. Petersburg, Tampa area, and he wrung one out. He feathered one in, stopped the engine, feathered it, and did rolls. I understand he was doing rolls with it. And when he came back in, the guy said, "Well, boy, if he can do that, we ought to be able to at least fly it with two engines." So it wasn't too bad after that. Really, the big problem with the 26 is when it was first designed, it had a beautiful design, proper wing loading, and then the government comes along and they decide there was a bunch of stuff they wanted to put in it, but it added weight. When you add weight, the wing loading goes up, okay? And when you do that, then the plane finds it harder to fly because it's got to do this lift. So then they come along and they improved it by adding, I think, 5 feet of wing length, and they increase the angle of attack by a couple of 3 degrees, and then they add some more weight, So it was defeating the purpose to the adding the thing. But it was the later planes, the one we flew in combat, were not that bad. The biggest problem was if you had an engine fail on takeoff, you were gone. That was it. I mean, it's one thing to be up in the air and have the engine go out, but it's something else on takeoff. I mean, that was curtains.
Do you remember crew members being lost that way?
Oh yeah. Matter of fact, some out of Ralph Waldrop's group did that. They had a early morning takeoff, and they down there they took off 6 abreast. We took off 3 abreast on the runway. Our runway wasn't as wide as theirs, and they were taking off. And as I understand, I've read about it. I wasn't there, but I've read about it, and then I think 2 of them went down at once, and then another one followed up that and went down. I think that if I was on the group behind that, I'd have been pretty scared, pretty leery about going ahead and throwing the throttle forward. But I think there were 3. I think there were 3 of them augured in on takeoff, and and we had some in our squadron. Matter of fact, on one of them, I was assigned to go out there and pick up some of the remains of the crew.
Do you have any memories of any of the? Do you have any memories of your the people that you worked with being lost?
Yeah. Can't remember all the names. There was one. Well, we were in Corsica. No, it was in Sardinia. He had just come into the squadron. A guy named Ples Davis. He was making claims that he was married to a starlet out in Hollywood. Big deal. So, but he was real popular with the guys. They thought he was something else because he was from in Hollywood. But I think on his 3rd mission, he was shot down, and we were told that everyone was lost on that plane. And then later on, I was summer court officer for. What is that? The one for going through their property and packaging it to send home to the home? Personal effects officer, personal effects, and I did that on 2 occasions. Not that I particularly knew the people on that crew, but they were members of my squadron, and I'd seen them around. You always.
Can you describe, because you did this once before, describe to me your first mission when you flew up and you were flying into, I guess it was barrage flak, but just give me your impressions.
No. The first mission I flew was on the Piombino steel mills in Leghorn or Livorno, Italy. And to be honest with you, but I was totally that was the rest of my crew's 5th mission. They'd flown 5 before they'd let me go up and let the rest of the crew get a little bit seasoned in combat. And we go up there and we're heading up to coming in onto the coast. And I don't know where in the hell they were getting that flak, but and normally they send up colored flak to warn the fighters, to tell the fighters to come in, and then to tell the fighters to go out because they were going to start shooting. They were shooting everything up there. And it suddenly dawned on me they were trying to kill us. I mean, I had my waving my American flag. I was going to win the war, and all of a sudden my order cooled down quickly. I'd have been very happy if we'd have flown back there and they said, "Okay, you're going to go back to the States now," but that was not going to happen. I knew that, and you did what you had to do.
Describe to me that flight that you did make where you came up and.
Oh yeah, well, barrage flak was something that happened occasionally. It wasn't. Most of the time it was tracking flak, most of it. But the barrage flak was when you'd get to the initial point and turn towards to the target that you were going to, and the bombardier doors would open. The bombardier would literally take over. And at that point, until you dropped that bombs, there was no turning left or right. You went straight ahead. Okay, the Germans down on the ground that were shooting the 88s, they had radar, and they could figure out, they knew what altitude we were flying at. So they'd preset it, and they'd right at the altitude that you were flying, and they'd shoot out ahead of you so that you had to fly through the big, it was a big black cloud with orange flashes going off inside of it. Fortunately, we had somebody, I don't know whether it was in our group or wing, who devised something called glide bombing. And glide bombing was trying to defeat the fact that they knew what altitude we were at when we turned onto the initial point. And when turned on initial point and we'd start with the bombardier doors open, they would just start a gentle descent. And of course the bombardiers had trained to to use that. I mean, to be able to drop the bomb. So the fact is that anti-aircraft fire that was going over you was not too dangerous. I mean, except for the falling flak that would come back and hit you in the windshield or do some damage from just falling. But it wasn't the same as the one that was hitting you from an explosion underneath. And that helped a lot. I mean, the glide bombing helped a lot. But I'd say that the barrage flak was the one that affected me the most when we come in there to seeing that big black cloud and the orange flashes going off inside of it, and you knew damn well what that was. That was almost like running a belt line when you were a kid. That's a rite of passage.
Can you describe your hairiest missions?
Well, any of them that where the flak was real heavy was hairy. I mean, and occasionally you'd see one of your other planes in the squadron or in the group hit and start smoking and starting to go, not necessarily going straight down, but losing altitude, and you knew that they'd been damaged. So those were all scary to a point. For me, I think the one that bothered me the most on takeoff was, I think it was my second mission as pilot, and we were in Corsica, and I was in Sardinia. We were used to taking off over land, period, and it was a distance. You got well into the air before you got over the water, okay? But in Corsica, we were right on the coast, and where we were at Paretta, we didn't have a lot of the terrain was not real high up. I understand some of the others went out over a cliff when they took off, which gave them a little more margin. When I took off from that, and I started getting altitude because that's the way planes fly. But we got out over the Mediterranean where the water was a lot cooler than that land, and lift went away. And I think I was probably about 100 feet or so at that point, and we dropped at least 50 feet. I know that. I mean, I didn't know when it was going to stop, but we dropped about 50 feet, and then it leveled out and took off. But that was a hairy one. And of course, my last one where we had the tire blow out. We were at 10,000 feet flying along, and we felt an explosion. We thought we'd been hit by flak, but we didn't see any flak anywhere else. So, but anyway, it looked out to the right nacelle, and one door had been blown off. The tire had blown. The other nacelle door was loose. It was dangling and kind of flopping back a little bit. To explain what happened was, as you go up, the two things happen as you ascend. One is it gets cooler, about 2 degrees per 1,000 feet, as I remember. And the other thing is that the tire pressure expands, and the tire is under much more stress at 10,000 feet than it was down there at the ground. And apparently the tire had been damaged, unbeknown to anybody, and when it just reached a point where it couldn't take it anymore, and it let loose. Then we're told to turn back, to going back to base, and we did that. We got back to Villacedro. No, that was, we got back to Villacedro. And, that was in France. Memories are jogging around. Well, it was in France. Anyway, we got back to the base, and they told us no, they didn't want us to land there because the rest of the group would be coming in about an hour or so, and just in case we messed up the runway, they didn't want us to land. So they sent us down to Lyon, France. And at Lyon, we decided to unarm the bombs and drop them in a rather large lake just outside of Lyon. And then we did what's called a belly landing. We came in and landed with the wheels up. And one thing about the B-26, it may have been a plane that didn't like to fly much, but when you had to belly in, you could probably figure you were going to walk away from it. It was a very, very stoutly built frame on that thing, and when we sat down, you come in and just over the runway and you chop the throttles and just settle down onto it. That way you don't drop for a long distance. And started skidding along. Of course, the props had, the first one hit, it was all kinked up. But anyway, you slide down the runway. Well, somebody in the back smelled the friction burning the paint on the inside of the plane, and they thought the plane was on fire, and they yelled fire. So when we finally came to a stop about 100 feet or so past the end of the runway, everybody jumped out. The exit place for anybody when you're on the belly is the hatches up above the pilot and the co-pilot. And I wound up with a couple of footprints on my shoulders before I could unhook my seat strap and the shoulder strap. They were already going out over my shoulder. But anyway, we jumped out. I was wearing fleece-lined boots. It got awfully cold up in the air when you were flying. And I was wearing fleece-lined boots, and I jumped out of that plane and didn't look back, and it felt like I had track shoes on as I was running across there trying to get away from that. Of course, when we looked back, we saw there was no fire, and they came on back. And you know that I'm a photographer, so I went back and immediately started taking pictures of it. And I cannot find those prints. I have looked for the last 3 years. Something happened to them. They're gone. Or mislaid.
Got any stories about any real characters that you worked with over there?
Well, most of the characters I met after I left that when I went to that service group. One of them was.
We'll get to that in a minute. Any characters during your combat mission?
Ray Town was one when he said, "Does anyone want to buy a good watch?" And it's no, there was the guys that I associated with were pretty down to earth. They were, gosh, I'm thinking I can't think of anyone that stands out.
Okay, so after you were through with your combat missions, 64 combat missions, you volunteered to go fly with supply planes. Tell me about.
Well, there's an outfit there called the 310th Service Group, and I don't know, when I heard about it and heard that they were flying C-47s, I'd always admired the old Goonie bird. They came out back in 1934 or something, I think, and it's such a greatly designed plane for the purpose it was built for. And I figured I wasn't in any great hurry to come back to the States as long as I wasn't being shot at. It was different when I was in combat. Almost every time you took off, you could figure that you'd get shot at a bit. So I volunteered to go to the 310th Service Group. When I got there, there was a guy named Edward S. Papelian. They called him Pappy. And he was the one that was leaving the group, and because there were 4 pilots, and there's two C-47s, and there were 4 pilots, a pilot, co-pilot, and most of us, we switched around. One guy would fly pilot one time, and next time the other one would. But anyway, Pappy and I, we made several flights. We went down to Rome on one occasion. I know that we went to a place called WWII over in Western Germany. And then Pappy left, and when he did, well, then I took over as as the 4th, and there were 3 other guys there. One of them was Ralph Waldrop, and Keith Waddell, and Dick Lebica, and they've remained friends ever since then. And they were characters. Okay, you were asking about characters. That's where they were.
How many of those missions did you fly? How long did you do that?
We didn't count those as missions. Okay, although we had shortly after I got there, it was about 3 or 4 weeks that Pappy had just left, and I guess maybe a week or 2 after he left, we got an assignment to fly gas, oil, and ammunition out to the front, and so we flew up to Orly, France. About half the time, you had to do what they call a side slip, where you'd come in and then because of crosswind, you have to turn sideways and go down and then straighten out the runway. Anyway, we'd load up with gas, oil, and ammunition. We'd fly that out to the front. Don't remember how close we were to the front. I just know that it was close enough that after they unloaded that, they would come with stretchers and they would load up the plane with wounded people and on the stretchers and we'd fly those back to Orly again, and they'd land, and they would take the wounded off, and then immediately reload us with the gas, oil, and ammunition. We'd fly that back, and I would say that sometimes we did that as much as 4 times in a day, and it was grueling. I mean, it was really grueling because I think we went about 10 days, 10, 11 days on it, and by the time we finally finished, I think we were worn out. Found out later the colonel called us in and told us, Colonel Hicks, and he called us in and told us that he had just gotten the Legion of Merit, and it was based on the fact that we had done this job, and he was the commander. And he told us, he says, I know I didn't earn this, you guys did it for me, and I'd like to do something for you. So immediately we said, promotions. He said, well, I'll work on that, and which never did mature. But at any rate, so the other thing, he said, what else? And I'd been thinking about it for a while because I'd learned to fly in a Piper Cub, so that was my first plane to fly. And I always enjoyed that. I thought it was just like a little puddle jumper, and it was almost a toy. So we asked him if there's any possibility that he could get a little Piper. I think those were the L4s, if I'm not mistaken. They later L5s and L6s, but I think that was the L4. And by gosh, he got busy, and he found 2 of them. They were not in the greatest shape. As a matter of fact, when we went down to pick them up, I think he took a mechanic down from the service group depot, and he doctored them up so that we could fly them back to Dijon. And then they took them, put them in the shop there, and that was depot level maintenance. Those guys were sharp. They had the facilities and the knowledge, and they just literally made those planes like new. And we asked them to paint a lightning strip down the side, and on either side of the plane there was a lightning strip going down, and a little cloud, and we called ourselves the Cumulo Muck Muck Group. So that's.
Got any pictures of those?
I have a picture of the plane, but it was where Dick LeBeacon and I had flown to Nancy, France, date some nurses up there, and I had a couple of the nurses standing by the little plane. But
I didn't see that. All right, you got anything else you want to talk about?
That pretty well covers my time in combat, and then subsequently, immediately following combat in the service group.
Anything more you want to say about the B-26?
Well, it brought me home. Okay, and I don't mean figurative. You know, it's. Let's just say that I finished all 64 missions. I was still alive. I was uninjured, except for the one occasion where some flak hit the windshield and little shards of the plexiglass came back and hit me, and I was co-pilot that day, and hit me and also the pilot, and it drew blood. The flight surgeon offered us the Purple Heart, and both of us turned it down because there had been some serious injuries that day. A couple of guys killed, and one of them had fingers cut off, and another one got a hit in the thigh, and so we didn't feel it was right for us to have the same kind of medal that they got. I've cut myself worse shaving than the damage was.
All right, thanks.